Welcome back to our channel. Today we bring you one of the most dramatic and unforgettable stories in the Bible, the story of a boy who stood before a giant, armed with nothing but faith, and changed the course of his nation's history. This is the story of David and Goliath, but not just the story you've heard before. Stay with us until the end of this journey, because what happened in that valley will surprise you. And don't forget, if you enjoy these emotional stories, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss the next chapter. The valley of Elah stretched wide between two ridges of rock, its silence broken only by the distant shouts of armies that had faced each other for weeks. On one side stood the Israelites, their tents lined in cautious order, spears and shields glinting in the sun. On the other, the Philistines, their warriors hardened, their weapons forged with iron, their confidence unshakable. But the battle had not begun. Every morning and every evening, a figure emerged from the Philistine camp, a man taller than any soldier in Israel, his armor gleaming like bronze fire. Goliath of Gath, a giant of nearly 10 feet, with a spear like a weaver's beam and a voice that thundered through the valley. "Choose a man to fight me," he roared, his laughter echoing against the cliffs. "If he kills me, we will serve you, but if I prevail, you shall serve us." Day after day, his challenge rang out. Day after day, no one moved. Even the bravest of Saul's soldiers trembled. Fear spread like disease through the ranks, and in his tent, King Saul himself sat in silence, a crown heavy on his head, but no courage in his heart. It was into this scene that David first stepped. A shepherd boy from Bethlehem, the youngest son of Jesse. He had not come to fight, nor to boast, nor to claim glory. He had come only to bring bread and grain to his brothers, who served in Saul's army. His hands were more accustomed to a harp than a sword, to guiding sheep rather than wielding a spear. He was, by all appearances, the most unlikely answer to a giant's taunt. But sometimes, the unlikely is exactly what God chooses. When David reached the camp, he heard the giant's challenge. He saw the fear in the soldiers' eyes, the hopelessness in their silence. His heart burned, not with pride, but with indignation. How could an uncircumcised Philistine defy the armies of the living God? His brothers mocked him. "Why have you come down here? And with whom have you left those few sheep in the wilderness? You are full of pride, David. You only came to watch the battle." But David answered simply, "Is there not a cause?" It was a question that echoed louder than Goliath's roar. For while the soldiers measured the size of the enemy, David measured the size of his God. Word of his courage spread quickly through the camp, until it reached Saul himself. The boy was brought before the king, small and unarmored, yet his eyes blazed with conviction. "Let no one's heart fail because of this Philistine," David said. "Your servant will go and fight him." Saul looked at him in disbelief. "You are only a boy. He has been a warrior since his youth." But David recounted his past, not of battles in arenas, but of struggles in the fields. "Your servant kept his father's sheep. When a lion or a bear came and carried off a lamb, I went after it. I struck it and rescued the sheep from its mouth. When it turned on me, I seized it by its hair, struck it, and killed it. The Lord who delivered me from the paw of the lion and from the paw of the bear will deliver me from this Philistine." There was something in his words, something that stirred even the weary heart of Saul. Against all reason, the king nodded. "Go," he said, "and may the Lord be with you." And so the boy, the shepherd, the harpist, became the chosen one to face the terror of Israel, not by sword, not by spear, but by faith alone. The sun rose over the valley of Elah, casting long shadows across the ridges where two armies faced each other. The dew on the grass glistened like 1,000 tiny mirrors, but the air was thick with fear. For 40 days, the same voice had shattered the dawn and silenced the courage of Israel. Goliath came out once more. His steps shook the earth as his armor clanged like thunder. His bronze helmet caught the sunlight, blinding those who dared to look directly at him. He towered above the soldiers, a mountain of flesh and iron. The shaft of his spear was as thick as a man's arm, and the tip gleamed with deadly promise. He roared across the valley, his voice echoing off the cliffs. "Why do you line up for battle? Am I not a Philistine, and are you not the servants of Saul? Choose a man and let him come down to me. If he is able to fight and kill me, we will become your subjects. But if I prevail against him, then you shall serve us." The words pierced the hearts of Israel's army like arrows. Men who had trained for years, men seasoned in battle, now trembled at the thought of facing him. Their spears rattled in unsteady hands. Their eyes darted to Saul's tent, hoping for leadership, for courage, but none came. Day after day, Goliath's challenge echoed, and day after day, silence answered him. The valley became a stage for fear, and the Israelites played their parts well. When David heard those words for the first time, something stirred inside him. It was not the fear that gripped the others, but a fire. His heart pounded, not with terror, but with righteous anger. "Who is this uncircumcised Philistine?" David asked aloud, that he should defy the armies of the living God. His voice, though young, carried a conviction that startled those around him. The soldiers sneered, shaking their heads. To them, he was just a boy, too small, too naive, too foolish to understand the gravity of the challenge. But David's words refused to be silenced. Goliath returned again, his laughter mocking, his taunts dripping with contempt. I defy the armies of Israel this day. Give me a man, that we may fight together. The echo of his voice rolled across the hills like thunder, and even the bravest among Israel felt their hearts collapse. Yet, standing in the midst of trembling warriors, David's fire only grew. He did not see a giant too big to defeat. He saw a man too arrogant to stand against God. The contrast was almost unbearable, a towering warrior armored in bronze, and a shepherd boy in plain clothes, his only weapons faith and memory. For the same God who had given him victory over the lion and the bear was now about to call him to something greater. And in that valley, while fear echoed louder than steel, another voice began to rise, the voice of a boy who dared to believe that the battle was not his, but the Lord's. The camp of Israel still trembled. Each morning the giant came, and each morning the men of Saul shrank back, their courage swallowed by the shadow of Goliath. But on this day, something was different. A boy, no older than a teenager, stood in their midst with fire in his eyes. David had already spoken before Saul. The king had tried to cover him in bronze, to weigh him down with armor that did not fit, but the boy had refused. The sword slipped from his hand as though it belonged to another life, another world. He shook his head and pushed the armor aside. I cannot fight in these, he said. I have not tested them. Instead, David bent low by the brook that wound through the valley. The water whispered as it moved over smooth stones. He placed his hand into the stream, searching, feeling. He did not rush. One by one, he chose 5 stones round, polished by time and water. He slipped them into his shepherd's pouch. To the watching soldiers it looked like foolishness. To David, it was enough. His weapon was not iron or bronze, it was trust. His arm carried not the weight of steel but the memory of battles fought when no one was watching. The lion, the bear, victories not shouted on the battlefield but whispered in lonely pastures where only God had seen. As he stood, sling in hand, the whispers of the soldiers reached his ears. He will die. He is only a boy. This is madness. But David did not hear them. His ears were tuned to another voice, the same voice that had guided him under the stars, the same presence that had walked with him in the stillness of the hills. He began to walk toward the valley floor. The earth beneath his feet seemed to hold its breath. Each step carried him closer to the shadow that had paralyzed Israel for 40 days. Goliath saw him and laughed. The giant's laughter was like thunder breaking the sky. Am I a dog, that you come at me with sticks? He mocked his armor-bearer standing beside him. Come here, and I will feed your flesh to the birds of the sky and the beasts of the field. The Philistines cheered, their voices rising in cruel delight. But David did not falter. He lifted his eyes to the giant, unflinching, and spoke words that no boy should dare to speak against such a warrior. You come to me with a sword, with a spear, and with a javelin, but I come to you in the name of the Lord Almighty, the God of the armies of Israel, whom you have defied. This day the Lord will deliver you into my hand. I will strike you down, and all the earth will know that there is a God in Israel. The valley grew silent. Even the Philistines paused at the audacity of a shepherd boy. His voice did not crack. His hands did not tremble. His faith stood taller than the giant himself. Saul's men watched from the ridge, their hearts pounding, torn between terror and awe. Some closed their eyes, unwilling to witness what they thought would be a massacre. But others leaned forward, as though sensing that history was about to turn on the courage of a child. The wind stirred through the valley. Dust rose around David's feet as he planted himself firmly, sling in hand, stone ready. Goliath roared again, stepping forward, his shadow engulfing the boy. But David did not shrink back, for in his heart he was not alone. The valley grew still. Dust hung in the air, as though creation itself waited to see what would happen next. On one ridge, the Philistine army chanted the name of their champion. On the other, Israel stood silent, their faith hanging by a thread. And in the middle of it all, 2 figures faced each other, a shepherd boy with a sling, and a giant with armor that shimmered like bronze fire. Goliath's lips twisted into a sneer. He saw no warrior before him, only a boy with soft skin and bright eyes, dressed not for war but for wandering. His laughter rolled like thunder, cruel and cutting. Come closer, boy, and I will give your flesh to the birds and the beasts. But David did not move back. He planted his feet on the earth, steady and unshaken. His voice rang out clear, stronger than fear, stronger than the echo of the giant's taunts. You come to me with sword and spear, but I come to you in the name of the Lord Almighty. Today he will deliver you into my hands. The Philistines roared with laughter. The Israelites trembled, and then silence. David reached into his pouch. Fingers brushed over stone until they found the one that seemed made for this moment. Smooth, heavy enough to strike. He placed it in the sling, leather straps curling around his hand. He began to run. Goliath's eyes widened with surprise. He had expected fear, hesitation, pleading, but this boy charged at him as if he were the hunter and the giant the prey. David swung the sling in wide arcs. The air whistled, the stone blurred. His arm, practiced from lonely nights in the hills, guided by memory and by faith, released. The stone flew. It cut the air, faster than sight, straighter than any spear. Time seemed to hold its breath as it found its mark. The one place the giant was exposed. The stone struck Goliath's forehead. The sound was sharp, final. The giant staggered, his knees buckled. The earth shook as his body toppled forward, face to the ground. The mighty Goliath, who had defied Israel for 40 days, lay silent in the dust. The valley erupted. The Philistines gasped in horror. Their laughter died in their throats. The Israelites shouted, their voices rising like a wave. But David did not stop. He ran to the fallen giant, seized Goliath's own sword, massive, heavy, and with one strike, ended what God had already decreed. The boy who had come with bread and faith now stood with a victory no man in Israel had dared to claim. And all who saw it knew, this was not the triumph of youth over age, or weakness over strength. This was the triumph of God's power over human pride. The body of Goliath lay silent in the dust, his massive frame sprawled across the valley floor. The Philistines stared in disbelief. Their champion defeated by a boy with a sling. For a moment, the world seemed frozen, then panic broke. The Philistines screamed in terror, scattering toward the gates of Ekron. Their army, once confident, now fled like sheep chased by wolves. The Israelites, who had trembled for 40 days, suddenly surged forward with renewed strength. Their voices thundered as they charged down the ridge, chasing their enemies across the plain. That day, Israel's shame turned to triumph. The valley that had echoed with mockery now roared with victory. And at the center of it all stood David, breathless, the giant's sword still heavy in his hands, his heart pounding not with pride, but with awe. He knew this was not his doing, not his strength, not his arm. It was the Lord's battle, and the Lord had won. The victory spread like wildfire through the land. Songs began to rise. Saul has slain his thousands, and David his tens of thousands. The name of David, once unknown outside the pastures of Bethlehem, now carried weight across Israel. Saul watched the boy with mixed eyes. Admiration, but also a seed of envy. Yet for the people, David was no longer just Jesse's son. He was the hero who had lifted their disgrace. But David himself did not see a crown. He saw sheep still grazing on hills. He saw the fields of Bethlehem, where the voice of God had first stirred in his heart. He remained the shepherd, only now the flock he defended was a nation. That night, as the camp settled, David sat alone under the stars. The sword of Goliath rested beside him, larger than any weapon he had ever seen. Yet his fingers reached not for steel, but for his harp. Softly he played the melodies of his youth, songs of a God who saves not with sword or spear, but with presence. His voice rose into the darkness. The Lord is my light and my salvation. Whom shall I fear? The valley that had once echoed with the voice of a giant now carried the song of a boy who believed. From that day, Israel would never forget. Parents told their children, priests repeated it in the temple. Generations carried the story, that when no warrior dared, a boy trusted in God and brought down a giant. It was more than a victory. It was a revelation, that faith is stronger than fear, that obedience is greater than might, and that the living God is never absent, even in the darkest valleys. And so, David's journey began. Not as king, not as conqueror, but as a boy who believed that one stone, one prayer, and one God were enough to change history. If this story touched you, subscribe to our channel. We have many more biblical stories to tell. Stories of faith, courage, and hope that continue to inspire even today.